I didn't have my standards high enough to have a filter at the time that these guys are the most committed, because the most committed get the most results. You can give someone the perfect roadmap. I'm sure you've had frustrating moments where you're like, I laid it all out for you. It's right there. And now you're blaming me. And,
Sure. What makes a great coach is a great student.
So her dad would ask her and her brother, if I remember correctly, would ask, what did you fail at today?
That's good.
So then it became embedded in her psyche that this is progress. Success or failure is not failure, it's learning. If I put myself in environments where my success is inevitable because I'm just surrounded, do whatever it takes to put yourself in a higher level state, higher level environments, pay what you got to, invest the time that you have to, take time off, whatever, you will shift, and it will shift by default. Thanks for having me on, and love how you show up in the world. And you're one of the few people in the world that I know that has been to more countries than I have. You're at 45 and counting. And
I barely beat you, Mike. Barely.
Yes. So I think I'm in my 30s still. So
you know what? I'm going to jump right into this because everybody always asks this question. Now that you talked about the travel thing, and I hate this question, so I'm just going to lean right into this. I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite country? I always end up with 3. I'll just let you know. I can never settle on one.
I know. All right. I'll go with my favorite city.
Ooh, okay.
That's Italy. Have you been to Florence yet? All right. So we got married there, my wife and I. And we've been there, and we had 70 friends there for the wedding, and it was just epic. And I've been there 7 times, probably 7 or 8 times. I love Florence, because once you're in that like little pocket, for me, it's the most interesting city in a small scale, because it's when you're in the old city, you don't need a car, you walk everywhere, and you got such architectural, the birthplace of Renaissance happened there, from Da Vinci to Michelangelo to Medici, the modern banking system. And you look at, we're in a pandemic right now. What's interesting, the Renaissance was born after the Black Plague spread throughout Europe.
Wow.
So what's being shaken up right now, and what's going to be birthed in humanity and in the world as a result of this COVID situation?
That's such a great analogy. I'm so glad you pointed that out, because, and we've talked about this a lot on PivotMe, but people keep focusing on what has been lost or what has changed, but amazing things are also getting birthed out of this. And we've already seen change happening. I'm really glad you made that connection, because that was a devastating time. I mean, it's plague, and wonderful things came from it. Not that we don't struggle in this time, but ultimately some really amazing things can come out of it if we choose to.
Yeah. I mean, you think of Black Plague, is like 70% of some cities were just wiped. And the Black Plague went on for like 100 years. In essence, so just cycle after cycle after cycle. Marcus Aurelius, he died of the Black Plague. But over 50 million people were lost in the Black Plague at a time where the world's population was a mere fraction of what it is now. And so it's crazy. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm excited to see what ends up coming out of this. Some great things are going to come out of this. So Mike, tell me so I'm glad you had an answer to that, because I end up saying 3 countries. I'm like, well, for outdoors, it's this, and for sing, it's this. So I love that you had a succinct answer. I need to strive to nail it down to 1. How did you get into this kind of work? Like, as I read your bio and the things that you've done, how did you start down this path?
Yeah, good question. So first, I would say when I was 31, I wrote on my positive affirmations board that I mentor and lead some of the brightest and best people in the world. And at the time, I was just investing in real estate and selling real estate. And I know you have a real estate background as well. So I was in that arena, and I was like, someday I'm going to be doing that. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I just had this when I did this, I actually did Tony Robbins' Personal Power too. And that was when I wrote my first affirmations, and I was like, all right, I think I'm supposed to do this at some point. And then at about age 35, 36, I'd started in the span of 2 years, I'd started 4 or 5 different businesses, and then started getting more and more people reaching out to me that were like, hey, Mike, can I have 30 minutes? Hey, Mike, can we go to lunch, coffee, whatever. Soon enough, like half my time was spent mentoring people, mostly for free, like honestly, all for free at the beginning. And I was like, I'd walk away from a coffee and be like, man, I poured into this guy. And guess what? He wouldn't take any action. And I was like, I just gave him $1,000 of my time for that lunch, and the dude is not effing going to take action. This is going to, then I was like, I'm cutting that down. And then I had my first paid coaching client, really my second, I guess, actually. He was running a 25 million a year e-commerce brand, co-founder of a brand called iHeartDogs.com, and they have millions of followers. And so I started mentoring my buddy Marshall Morris, and charging $1,000 a phone call is what I would charge at the time. And then I was like, all right, I love doing this. I get results. And I was like, I got to come up with, I didn't like the one-on-one necessarily because it's so energetically taxing. And I was like, I can't scale that. And so I started a mastermind, a high level mastermind the next year. And heck, I would call up friends and say that I had mentored some, and they'd say like, Mike, if you think I should be in it, let me know. And I'm in. Just let me know how much it is, and we'll get it taken care of. And so that's how I started my first mastermind at the time, and then got rolling, and had other people say, that I was their best mentor they've ever had. And from actually age 22 was the first time someone told me that. And then and I just love the game of entrepreneurship, but especially love the people that are in it. I mean, you've been in the hey, it's a beautiful thing, and but it's also a grueling, painful thing in many moments. So
sure is. Mike, I love that story. I want to ask a question about when you were meeting with the people and they weren't taking action. Would you say it's one of two things? Is that you were meeting with the wrong people, or is it because you were not charging and people who pay attention? Which one of those, or a third option?
I think it would be both. Because when you have some skin in the game, or some sort of commitment and accountability, then you know what, you listen up and you shift. And then I didn't have my standards high enough to have a filter at the time that these guys are the most committed, because the most committed get the most results. You can give someone the perfect roadmap. I'm sure you've had frustrating moments where you're like, I laid it all out for you. It's right there. And now you're blaming me. And,
what makes a great coach is a great student. And that's the piece that people always forget. In fact, at PivotMe, our tagline, which is right there, is educate, elevate, execute. And I'm like, people are all about the education. They're pretty good about the elevate, but they skip step 3. And I'm like, you can't have the result without step 3, and it's the execution. So you've got to be a good student for a great coach.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And it's powerful when you get that great student that is committed, and then they execute the roadmap, and you learn from them along the way too. So I love it.
For sure. So it's just speaking of coaching, so you've had some amazing coaches as well. So when I look back at your history, you've studied with some amazing people I mentioned in the bio. Specifically, I know that you've spent more than 1,400 hours with Tony Robbins and his teaching. So in that time, give us some of the highlights of what you learned with them, whether it's through Tony Robbins or Russell Brunson, but also maybe what surprised you about it.
Tony, I'll hit on what surprised me. Tony will go like 21-hour days on events. I mean, the first time I took my wife I took her in an ultimate relationship event. We had dinner that first night. It was our first ever Tony Robbins event, if I remember correctly. And we had dinner that night, and we had dinner at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. She was so tired, I literally had to spoon feed her, like put the food up, and she does not do well without food. So Tony goes hardcore. But what I learned from Tony is like, you got to manage your state. And this is why, I just finished up a second mastermind in a row, mastermind weekend, in-person mastermind. And what happens in these masterminds, or experiences is, or, you know, on your one-on-one coaching too, like people are pinging off of each other in the energy. And it's actually on the quantum, I learned this from this book right here, actually, Quantum Success. I'm reading this for the second time. It has some layers of quantum physics in there. There's a thing called phase entanglement. Phase entanglement is when two atoms collide, and as they collide and connect, they leave pieces or residue of each other as they bounce off, right? So if you think about a mastermind, what's beautiful and powerful about masterminds, like at both weekends, I just had one for my e-commerce guys and another one for my expert brand builders. They left in whole identity and a whole state because they've pinged and they're taking residue off of one another, and they're leaving residue on one another because, and you get yourself in a resourceful, empowered, generous, visionary state. Then you think and feel differently, and it carries with you. Like if like when I was with Tony, I the energy and the momentum I would carry for like 30 days.
Sure.
And then I was like, that's why I need to be, at that time, I was like, I'm going to do Tony for a year. I did his platinum partnership program for 2 years. That's how I did 1,447 hours with him. And man, it shifted my identity, shifted my state. Like I wanted to anchor in that new way of being. So that's the beauty of masterminds. And then secondly, the power of proximity is like, man, you get yourself in those environments. It's like the relationship lubrication is so much more powerful, and things just come easier because you show up differently. You show up more confidently. You know, lots of times we know we have the potential, but we don't have the certainty. So it closes the gap between the potential and the certainty.
Yeah, it certainly does. Relationships really are an exchange of energy. And that can work to the benefit, as you were just mentioning. It can also work to the negative. Yeah. Using some of his language, or the 5 people you spend the most of your time with. Sometimes that can sting a little bit when we say it. We did a podcast a few weeks ago on that. And, you know, essentially the premise was, don't just stick with your default peer group. Your default peer group are people that you work with, people that you live next to, people that your kids play ball with. And a lot of us end up with this default peer group that we did not design. And that's fine. You might have barbecues with them and you spend some time with them, but you've got to feather in the right people that are elevating you too. We can't just stick with our default peer group, and masterminds are a great way to do that. And just being intentional about, hey, we call it the future friends list, like making an actual list of, hey, who needs to be on my future friends list, and be intentional about developing those relationships. They're not always easy to have. It might be, I'm taking up mountain biking, and I know a guy that's an amazing mountain biker. Over to him, let me intentionally establish a relationship. So wherever you're headed, make sure that your peer group is there to support it. So whether that's through a mastermind environment, or just you're being intentional about, I run a marathon. I've never run a marathon before, but Sarah on the street, I see her out running every morning at 6 a.m. I should probably make friends with Sarah.
Exactly. Yeah. And what happens is, you know, your identity shifts. One of the things I love to ask a lot of my clients and ask just friends, when you have a big vision, then what does the environment need to be to support that goal, to support your success? Like what does my environment need to be for my success to be inevitable? So you have to think about, like, you have to start thinking about yourself as an environmental designer. And so I know, and you know, with your clients, right? Like if you've got your productivity course that's out, right? You know, if I do these habits, if I feed my mind this way, if I put myself in relationship and proximity to these sorts of people every day and in rhythms and consistency, if I go to the gym 4 times a week at this hour and eat these things, you're going to get more of the body and feeling that you want, more of the energy, more of the health. Same thing in our business. It's like, hey, what's our environment? So like success becomes inevitable. It's almost like, what if gravity could pull us up instead of pull us down? And it can if we design the environment. And that's one of the things that Tony didn't exactly frame it that way, but that's how I reinterpret it and now teach it. So
yeah, exactly. I love the concept of success becomes inevitable, because sometimes it feels like this, like, nebulous thing that people are like, how do I crack the code to success? And, success leaves clues. But it's like, well, you just repeatedly do habits. Even if it's just 1% each day, you repeatedly do habits that get you in the room of success. And your group is a huge one of them, but also just model after successful people. It's so funny because people think that it's so difficult, but I'm like, a lot of successful people write books. Start there. Read books and follow their habits.
Exactly.
So one thing I'd love for you to talk about is, and then we'll get into your pivot point, but one of the things you mentioned that you talk on is overcoming business failure. And I'm sure that some of those lessons would also apply for personal failure as well. But talk to us about how you overcome business failures. You've had a lot of them. I'm sure you've had a lot of experience, or your clients have. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I was actually writing about that this morning in my Find Your Genius book a little bit. But I don't look at them as failures as much as setups. And I really embraced that mindset in my early 20s. And, there's two things that helped me embrace that. There's the story, you probably know the story about Thomas Watson Sr. It was in the middle of the Great Depression. He has a executive come to him that screwed up $1 million deal. So this is like, equivalent of probably, $200 million deal today. So he screws up a deal and it doesn't go through, doesn't close. And the executive comes to Thomas Watson Sr., the founder of IBM, and hands him his resignation. And Mr. Watson says to, let's say his name's Steve, says, Steve, I just paid $1 million for your education. You're not resigning. So, and then Sarah Blakely, one of the most successful, do you know what her dad used to ask her every day at dinner?
No.
So her dad would ask her and her brother, if I remember correctly, would ask, what did you fail at today?
That's good.
So then it became embedded in her psyche that this is progress. Success or failure is not failure, it's learning. In fact, one of the things I teach in my Rewrite Your Money Story process is that the middle class mindset versus abundance mindset. Middle class mindset is like avoid failure, get A's, don't do anything you can't succeed at. Failure mindset, or not abundance mindset, wealthy mindset, man, is like you're going to strike out, and it's a game, but get in the game. And then that's why like most multimillionaires, they've been bankrupt a couple times.
Oh yeah, they usually lose their money twice. Self-made millionaires usually lose it all twice.
I lost mine once. I didn't lose it all, but
hopefully you're a quick learner. You don't need the second one.
Yeah. But what happens is, I lost about $1 million of net worth personally between 2017 and January of 2020. Sucked. And I got married and all these things, and just stress, a lot of things just imploded. But in that midst of that, I knew all those stories. Now, it still wasn't easy to navigate. Like I kind of had in that mind every day, I'm like, I'm just going to handle the fires I can handle today. I can't handle them all. So, but I knew that it was going to remake me. And even now, like last year was my most profitable year yet. This year probably will be triple that, maybe 4x that. And I'll have made back what I accumulated or what I lost in a year. I'll made it back in essentially 2 years and then some. And then the next, 4 or 5 years are going to be gravy. So, and it's because of an identity. The lottery winners.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like they win 20 million, 3.5 years later, they're back in the trailer park.
Usually in more debt, almost always.
Yeah, because their identity didn't change. Same thing with we just watched the Super Bowl last night. Most NFL players, after they retire, same with most other college or professional athletes, they're destitute 3.5 years after their career is over because their identity didn't change.
Sure, absolutely. It's so important because I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who has come into some money. We're having the same conversation of, all right, so let me tell you the statistics. You're not going to be that statistic, but it's got to be because we put the right practices in place. We change identity and things like that, so you don't become the statistic. one thing you said, Mike, that was perfect. So when you're talking about failure and taking the shot, so ironically, just this morning, I posted on social media a quote essentially saying that missing the target is not the worst thing you can do. It's never taking the shot to begin with. Mm-hmm. And that quote, I loved it because one of our principles, so PivotMe is the podcast, but we're owned by my consulting firm, Maven. And one of our core principles is always take the shot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you miss it. And that's, number one is doing good things with good people. But number two is always take the shot. If you take the shot and you miss, and that's true of my team too, like, yeah, I had a great idea. We took the shot, didn't work out. All right. I appreciate the courage that you took the shot. And those can be expensive too, but always take the shot. It's not about always hitting the A. It's not always about hitting the target. It's about having the courage to keep showing up and trying again.
100%. That's beautiful, April. Great cultural value.
Yeah, it's huge for us. So I really want to emphasize what we talked about. I think that we were both speaking the same language, but I want to make sure that we really drive this home, which is self-made, very successful people usually lose it all on average twice. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But if if you're listening right now and things haven't gone as planned, maybe 2020, maybe COVID has really downsized your business, you're struggling. Some of the people we work with are in the entertainment business. That has been, if you're in the in-person entertainment business, they've been hit pretty hard. So if you're in that place, know that there is an upside. And if you chart a business's trajectory and even personal trajectory as well, if you look at the inflection points, moments where everything sort of changed, your real highs are often preceded by a low. And you just gave an example of that. Hey, I bottomed out, I lost $1 million, and now I'm having the biggest years I've ever had. That isn't coincidence. So if you're in the low moment, just know you haven't failed if you haven't quit. You only fail if you give up. If you throw in the towel and go, screw it, this isn't for me. All this, playing big, encourage thing didn't work out for me. That's when you fail. As long as you keep showing up, you might be 3 feet from gold. So if you're in one of those low moments, don't give up. Keep going. Keep showing up. Review what you're doing for sure. Take a look and say, hey, does this still make sense? Is the ladder I'm climbing, is it still against the right wall? Does this still make sense? But if the answer is yes, you only lose if you give up.
Yeah, 100%. So good. And what if the things that you fell at or things that go wrong, they're just there to set you up. Mm-hmm. I love to ask the question, what if this is a gift? What if this is a setup? What if this is there to, in terms of the pivot, like we are constantly pivoting, but all these things are leading you, if you're attuned to yourself and attuned to the flow, so many gifts are right there for you.
Yeah. We just got a comment in from Mike Forrester, and he said, is the recovery due to the intense focus when you hit the bottom? What would you say to that, Mike?
Yeah, often. Great question, Michael. So when we get on our bottom, what happens is we have to strip away things that weren't exactly aligned. So it's almost like you get a little more precise. You get a little more locked in on your bullseye, because you have to let go of things, even if they were good, even if you were like in your zone of excellence. I know when I started hitting my rock bottom, I was like, I got greater clarity on my zone of genius versus my zone of excellence. There was a lot of things I could do, but there's some things that I could be one of the best in the world at. And so it's a pruning. There's that verse, that story in John 15 in the Bible about the vine gardener who prunes the vines. If you go to a vineyard in Italy, man, they in the winter months they prune the vines really far down, like to where it looks really painful. Like you're like, hey, how's this vine going to recover? But it actually makes it even more fruitful. So the pruning is a fruit producing activity that is painful, but it becomes much more bearable when you know there's purpose and meaning behind it, and then you can embrace it instead of resisting it.
Yeah. What if when we're in those moments, we just go, well, I'm being pruned. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It reminds me of a C.S. Lewis quote about the blows of the chisel hammer that hurt us so much really is what's shaping the form of man. It doesn't feel like that when you get hit with a chisel, right? You're just like, why? How is this happening again? But ultimately, you are focusing on the things that are so important. Talk to us about the zone of genius. I love this concept. I'd love for you to explain what that is. And even what you were just saying about pruning away. Okay, here at PivotMe, we say a lot about don't say what you could do, because the answer is you're incredibly resourceful. You can do a lot of things. I rephrase it as what should you do? What's the thing that only you can do? Because especially as entrepreneurs, we're incredibly resourceful. We're like, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. To quote Keith Cunningham, most entrepreneurs die of indigestion, not starvation. We just like are taking it all in and really got to dial in on what makes the most sense. So talk to us about the zone of genius.
Yeah, so back in 2018, when I was in more of my rock bottom moments, you know, I had my real estate business that just crumbled 2 months before we got married, and then my marketing agency and branding agency wasn't doing that well. Like, we had expanded a lot, but then had a string of unsatisfied clients and a key staff member that wasn't a good fit, and she eventually left. And like, there was just so many things were going wrong. And then I had this time of reflection, actually, right after we were married, and we were in Florence, Italy, and my wife and I just got in a fight a bit, and she's kind of intensely speaking to me about, babe, you could do this. Like, people are paying for this from you. They want this, like, mainly my mind and my strategy and all those things, and not all this other stuff. And I kind of stormed out. It was a Sunday afternoon. I stormed out of the hotel or Airbnb we were staying in, and went to a coffee cafe and just hung out there for 2 or 3 hours and journaled and wrote and thought about. I'm like, hey, where is my area where I am a badass, where I could actually really flourish? And kind of landed on the mentoring and the coaching side, because that was the piece that people seem to love the most. Basically, it helped me incubate and develop the next layer of my zone of genius process, because I sort of started it the year before, but it's basically a combination of 5 different personality tests: your Colby Index, your Strengths Finder, your Myers-Briggs, your DISC, and your Wealth Dynamics. Of course, I do like the Enneagram as well. You take this inventory, and think of it as like, hey, how do I accumulate all the clues that I can possibly find about who I am and what on earth I'm meant to do, and where I'm a badass, where I suck ass. Let me create the greatest accumulation of clues ever. So you do all the unique abilities or unique talents. Then you go to the next piece, the second piece, your key relationships. So where's a natural proclivity? Like we were talking about Rory Baden and Brand Builders Group. So I've been friends with a lot of these guys for like 15 years. And best-selling authors and all this, and big personal brands. I love connecting with them. So I was like, oh, I have like 20 best-selling author friends. Maybe that's a clue. And I love being around them. Third, your unique life experiences. So you go back on your life, like, your bio, you've got all these cool life experiences, from Habitat to Humanity for real estate to 45 countries to a coup and all these things, right? So you got these cool things. So what are the clues about those things? Fourth thing is your values and passions. It's almost like those are like your last layer of filter. And then when you have overlap or synergy between unique abilities, key relationships, unique life experiences, and your values and passions, that will tell you there's something right here for you. You'll get more clarity. Doesn't mean you'll have exactly the right role, but you'll know, I'm meant to be in this type of role and play this type of part. Like, I know I'm one of the world's best at ideation, strategic ideation for entrepreneurs, mentoring, believing on reprogramming subconscious beliefs, and starting businesses. But I suck at managing a business. Leave me out of project management. Honestly, I don't want to be CEO of most of my companies. I know my lane much more clearly now, and so now I can describe myself, position myself for optimal success. If you look at most people who experience extraordinary things, they are usually in extraordinarily right positions.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Couple of things. One is what I love about this concept, Mike, is that the evidence is already there.
Mm-hmm.
So before you've got a course on this, you've got a tool to bring that out. But what's amazing is it's not necessarily we have to go sit on the hilltop and contemplate on it for 30 days. The evidence is already there.
Yeah.
We just got to get clarity. We've usually got to get quiet enough. We've got to get out of our business.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to get out of our personal life, out of our head, and just really go, what's the evidence? And our life is the evidence. If you just look at the exercises we do, is we do inflection points, right? So we do them for our business and we do them for our lives. There's so much evidence in there, the things that really shape us. There's so much evidence, but none of us look back and go, what did I experience? What were my highs? What did I really excel at? When was I in the zone versus when am I just pushing and versus being cool? I love that it's right there. The other thing I want to point out is, and once you figure out what your zone of genius is, really dialing into that, and then you got to practice some ruthless prioritization.
Mm-hmm.
Like just when we're talking about these big hurdles prune us. Well, then once we've got clarity, we've then got to prune our business because okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I could do all these other things, but I'm so or good at these. But I love when you said, what are you world class at? What can you be the best in the world at? It's great when you identify it. And you've got to go through and prune all the other stuff. Can you talk about that? Because that's hard because you've been doing a lot of things. And a lot of us are, as entrepreneurs, we're inclined to be the jack of all trades. So how do you go through and then prune that and practice that ruthless prioritization so you're only focused on your genius?
Good question. So first couple of things that I like to think about when I consider that is like, I can do almost everything I want in life. I just can't do it all at once.
I say the same thing all the time. I love it.
Yeah. So like for me, I don't know, like I was telling you before we hopped on, I'm going to do 2 books a year, probably for the next decade. I've already got my 2 books for next year lined out. And then there's books or other businesses. I want to start a sustainable wine company. I want to start I'm not going to go down that path too much, but you think about the sequencing, and then you think about, all right, how do I stay in my lane that is most fulfilling and most impactful? So part of the zone of genius, like my book, Find Your Genius, your natural pathway to wealth, fulfillment, and impact. So that means I also have to say no, the ruthless priority of what is it? Hell yes, all those things, right?
Hell yes. No.
And then, but also looking at, from the painful mistakes, I looked at most of my mistakes were improperly designed businesses. Mm-hmm. I didn't design out the business enough on the front end. And so that's why I like my sustainable wine company or my journal company that I want to launch, or eventually in the restaurant space at some point as well. I'm sequencing those things. I'm making sure I have the right team. I'm putting more effort on building the team so that I can say no to the parts that are not in my wheelhouse. It's the power of a positive no. I'm saying no to this so I can say yes to that. And there's a book called Power of Positive No that I got some of that concept from. But so that's a big piece. And Essentialism is another great book. I'm sure you've read it, but it's like when in the early stages of our success, it's more predicated on us saying yes. But once we reach a certain point, it's more based on what we say no to.
Yeah. And the trick is we don't know when we get there. Sometimes we need to hear. This is why designing the right peer group is important, or having a coach or a mentor that can clue you in, because that's something I see a lot. So last week, this is what our podcast was on, is saying no to clients, firing clients, referring clients out, or business opportunities out, because a lot of entrepreneurs don't recognize when they cross that threshold. We've got this memory of, oh man, I remember when it was so hard to get clients. I was hustling and I finally got 1, finally got 2. And then we kind of get in this scarcity mentality where at first when they start, they may have been a little desperate for the business, but then eventually you hit this tipping point of, now I've got to say no to business. Now I've got to say no to opportunities. There's so much things that are now available to me, and your no muscles got to get really strong. The whole concept of when you said yes to one thing, you said no to another. The trick is we're not often aware of what we're saying. Yeah, I'll do the speaking engagement. But what did you just say no to? Because if you're there, then you've said no to something else, which is okay as long as you've taken inventory and you're aware of what you're saying no to.
Yeah, exactly. You're on it.
Yes, good point. So one of the things we talk about here at PivotMe is a time when you did pivot. So whether that's when you lost a lot of money, when businesses went down, it might be something else. For some people, it was with Ian Cognac. He got stuck at 18 stories on a roller coaster in, I want to say it was Disneyland or some amusement park. Anyways, he was stuck upside down for an hour. It completely changed his life after that. Sometimes it's a car accident. Sometimes it's an upset in business. When was a time that everything changed for you? Or sometimes it's not even a significant event. It's just, I'm no longer willing to do this, or I'm going to make this big change. Do you have a time where you kind of experienced this pivot point?
Yeah, definitely. When my real estate business fell apart in, I guess it was March of 2018, I was like, my heart's not in this to rebuild this, even though it was my cash cow and I was making like a good amount of money for 5 to 10 hours a week. I just had no desire to go back in that. My heart, it would have been in violation. It felt like I would be violating my body if I went back into it. But at the same time, I'm like, all right, how am I going to replace that income? And so I ended up leaning more deeply into coaching, because that was, as I was telling about the Florence Cafe story. But I knew in that season and in other seasons where, like when I shut down, another pivot point was I was at Abundance 360, Peter Diamandis's mastermind. I was in that for 2 years. And we were talking about all these exponential technologies of the future. And then I knew the organizational life cycle and the industry life cycle from Dr. Echekadizis, where you go through, there's every industry, every business, like they start out as an infant, then they go to like a toddler, then they go to a little kid, then they go to teenager, then they go to young adult, and then they full-fledged prime, and then they go to laggard or like they're dying, like they're heading towards the end. And I realized I was in a bunch of dying industries.
Wow. Powerful.
I was in real estate, which is, people are always going to be buying homes, but people are more and more buying them from Zillow and other stuff and discount brokerage, all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, that didn't inspire my soul. And I had already reached the top. There wasn't a whole lot. I mean, yeah, I could have had a bigger team and sold more homes, but I was not inspired by that. Second, I had a socially minded car dealership where every car we sold helped us give away cars to single mothers in need and all that. And that was wonderful. And that was one of my proudest things. We gave away $300,000 worth of cars to single mothers in need. Well, I had that. But I knew that industry was also in the midst of disruption. And eventually we're all going to be like, at that time I had 3 cars. Now I have 1 car between my wife and I. And people are using Uber and Lyft and all that more and more, and that's only going to improve. Then branding agency, I was like, that's past its heyday. The margins are slim, and the headaches are many. So I was like, I got to get out of that. And but I saw the expert brand. That's still fairly early, and then also e-com still early. So e-commerce has only been around 21 years. So it's pretty crazy to think. And it's still, last year, it went from 16% of retail to probably about 30% by the end of the year. But, it's still very early. And most people still don't, even I coach a lot of guys in that world that are 7 to 8 figure e-com. There's a lot of things they could be doing better. So I wanted to be in industries, and I'm riding the wave, because most of what I learned from stock investing is, if you invest when there's a technology craze, and you invest in any technology company, like you remember the .com boom or the oil boom, man, it doesn't matter if you're in the best company or the worst company in that industry, you're going to be riding a wave. I want to be on the right waves.
Yeah, that takes clarity. I can't imagine the day that you're sitting there looking at all the businesses you've got and go, oh, crap, they're all in dying industries. Like, I didn't realize that I was investing in calculators and chimneys this whole time, like that was a eye-opening experience. What I'm curious, Mike, I love the giving the cars to single mothers. Why'd you pick that cause? Why is that near and dear to your heart?
Yeah. So we had a goal that was twofold for our car dealership. First, have the highest rated car buying experience, the most ethical, most fair car buying experience. So I partnered with two other buddies, and we honestly did. We had the highest rated car buying experience, straight up price, like, all inspected, high quality vehicles. Something that our vision was, hey, if I see you in a restaurant and you bought a car from us 2 years ago, we're not going to want to duck our head. We're going to be like, hey, we're proud. Like, you got a good car for a good value. I mean, no car is perfect, but, we'd be proud of that. And secondly, inspired by Tom's Shoes and also a cars ministry by a church in Chicago called Willow Creek, we wanted to, we knew, and in Nashville, we almost every single person, probably 75% of the people that we gave a car to, there would be single mothers with like 2 kids, and she had been taking the bus for the whole time, and what should take a normal person 30 minutes, she would spend an hour and a half. And because it's not New York, it's not these other places with great public transportation. Many of them did not even have a driver's license because they were like, I would never be able to afford a car. Was in their mindset, and they'd be like 25, 26 years old, 30 years old, and like, how is that possible? But that it shifts someone's life and career and income trajectory when they get a car and a leg up. And so that was our way of giving back, and one of the more unique elements and we would invite the community invite previous customers, PR sometimes, and the nonprofit, we would partner with nonprofits to find the most worthy recipient. And it was an absolute joy. It was one of my favorite moments, and I hope to be able to do stuff like that again in the future with my venture.
That's what it's all about, right? I mean, as you get through that next level of success, you open that door for you to turn back and open it for somebody else. I mean, that's such an important piece. And even when we talk about educate, elevate, execute, we talk about educate yourself and then educate others. Elevate yourself and then elevate others, because we're not meant to keep this all to ourselves. Like especially for those who are ready and willing to improve their life in whatever regards, whether that's, hey, if I have a car, it opens up possibilities and maybe I'll get a better job instead of one that the bus might fix me. I just love that you did that work. That is awesome, Mike.
Thank you.
One of the questions that came in from Mike Forrester was, with leaving those, so back to when we were talking about the businesses in the markets that were shrinking, with leaving those disrupted markets, are you now entering e-com and branding on a typical pattern or as a disruptor?
Good question, Michael. Big thing that I love working through is a blue ocean strategy. I'm sure many of you guys have heard of that. Great book, highly, highly recommend. In fact, I created a process for evaluating and creating my own blue ocean pathways and coaching a lot of my clients based on that book. But I highly, I won't go into an industry where I'm competing head to head. And there's 6 levers of blue ocean. First, it's I actually have it pulled up, I think. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah. All right. So the 6 levers of blue ocean that you want to look at on how you avoid competing head to head, which is that's not where you want to be. So you want to, obviously the mentality, and if you are not familiar with blue ocean versus red ocean, there's sharks in the water, there's blood in the water. If you throw fish, like bloodied fish in ocean, and there's sharks nearby, boom, like soon enough that whole area is just filled with it's red.
Give us an example of one that's in the red ocean.
So car dealerships, for example, it's a commoditized industry. When you look at in any industry that is being commoditized, that means the margins are going to shrink. You want to stay away from those versus, because your only main lever of differentiation is price.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the right place to be.
Business, yeah.
Yeah. So versus let's look at a blue ocean. Airbnb is essentially a blue ocean. Southwest Airlines actually created their own blue ocean by having a radically different model on the back end and the front end than American Airlines and Delta and all the other airlines that have been around. Even though they're still somewhat competing head to head, but they're working differently off of. Actually, let's see if I can. Do you mind if I share the little worksheet? I'll show the blue levers. Okay. So let me. I'm just going to share this so you guys can see it. If I will let me, I got to find the right spot.
We don't share often at StreamYard, so we're going to figure this out together.
Yeah.
Sure, it's fairly intuitive, hopefully.
Yes, I've done it before, but I can't figure out how to get there. But
share. Okay.
Basically, I'll give you guys the 6 levers of.
We can always put it in the show notes too, Mike. Yeah. So we've got a couple options.
Yeah, perfect. So customer productivity. Does your offer, your product or service radically change customer productivity? So you think of, Apple creating iCloud, things like that. That, yes, there's other fish in the sea, Google calendars and things like that, but there's less, and there's iCloud, the only one that's naturally integrated with your iPhone. All right. So that's a little bit of it hits on the second one, which is simplicity. Customer productivity, simplicity. You think of just how do you make things easier? A lot of people make their businesses are too complex. Then the third is convenience. Dollar Shave Club sold a generic product, but they revolutionized the convenience of delivery of razors, and it sold the company for $1.2 billion. Risk, do I reduce risk? Is the fourth area. How do you radically reduce risk? Carnival Cruise Lines launched their whole company with 110% guarantee. And meaning, hey, if they didn't like the cruise, they would refund their whole cruise experience and pay for their flight back. And that was their main leverage point for an offer. And they didn't even have, I don't know if you know the story, April, but they didn't have enough money to paint both sides of their first boat. So they would pull their cruise liner into the same side facing the beach every time for all their stops, because they barely launched this company. And because, if their patrons got back on the boat and then look back and like, wow, this is an ugly freaking boat. It's not even, homogeneous in paint. Like they would have never, returned. So you got to reduce risk. And you don't have to have all 6 of these, but these are just, some of the levers you can play on. Fun and image. Southwest uses fun and image, right?
Yeah.
And then the 6th thing is environmental friendliness. So, and you look at companies like Tesla, environmental friendliness, fun and image, ludicrous mode, convenience. Tesla was working on that. Put a charger in your house. Now you don't have to go to the gas station. Things like that. Now there's other drawbacks, but you focus on, and the more levers you can pull, the better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that you said you don't need them all, and the examples are perfect, because if you're sitting in a round table and someone said, we're gonna open this cruise line, right? We don't have the finance to paint the other side of the ship. You're like, this is a terrible idea. Do not do this. This is gonna fail. And yet they didn't. I love that story because it's a good reminder that, well, the rest was good enough to make up for the fact that half of the ship is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. That's great. I love looking at being aware of the industries that we get in, because we're tempted to just do what we know and do what we've always done. And so much of, honestly, of coaching and personal growth and development is just stopping and saying, yeah, I know you've done this always, but is this still serving you? This may have served you 1.0, but now you're 2.0. Does this still serve you? And asking the question about our habits, our business, and even our personal life, does this still serve me? Is this bringing out the best in me? Is such an incredible question.
Love that, April, and it's very relevant to your whole brand, PivotMe, which is, you look at all those companies, if they stop innovating, eventually a blue ocean becomes a red ocean. All blue oceans, if it's a true blue ocean, it becomes a red ocean. Look how many cars, how many electric car ads did we see on the Super Bowl last night? Cadillac has one, all electric. Like, that's becoming a crowded marketplace, even though Tesla is the first major pioneer. Sure. If they stop innovating, all the other, and now you're back in a red ocean.
Comes and eats your lunch. And that's true with everything. If we may be the best, but do not get comfortable. Do not sit back on your haunches, because someone will come and eat your lunch. Because unless you're working to get better, get faster, someone else is. Like, someone's chasing you, someone's right behind you, and the second you start to slack off, they're going to come up and take over. So Tesla. Mike, we talked a little bit about some of your success habits and principles that you follow. We discussed affirmations. Share with us a few. We talk a lot about whether that's morning routine, affirmation. I would work out in the morning, whatever that is. I establish a one thing every day. What are some of the things that you've done or continue to do that have helped make you successful, that you're real intentional about?
Number one, I'm always learning. Like, I make it a goal. I've had it a goal since I was 20 years old to read a book a week. Now, I haven't always done that, but I'm not far off. And I learned that, like, this guy, I went during finals week, my junior year in college, first semester, I went to a seminar by Brian Tracy. And so I'm at this guy's conference when I'm supposed to be studying for finals. And I was eating it up. It was way better than I would have gotten from being in the library.
Yeah.
But he said one thing. He said, guess what? Experts in any industry are paid disproportionately more than non-experts, or than people that are really knowledgeable. So what's it take to become an expert? My ears are perked. Read one book a month in your chosen field for 3 years. I was like, that's 36 books. I'm not waiting freaking 1 year or 3 years. I'm going to do it in 1 year. So I just said, so then from then on, I made a goal. I even had a list on my laptop of, like, these are the books I read this year. These are the books I'm going to read next year. And so just continually getting smarter and wiser. Growth never stops. And it makes life, it's one of 6 core human needs. When we keep growing, we feel so fulfilled and curious, being curious. So I'm learning from you. This, like, you stretched my mind today, and just reading your bio stretches my mind, right? And so putting yourself in proximity to learn from others, and just.
You don't ever graduate from this. That's the one thing I want to hear too. Here is Mike standing on, quite a bit of success, and he's still talking about growth and education. We don't graduate from personal development. We don't graduate from growth. We're constant students. We've got to show up and be like, all right, what am I learning today? I hear what you're saying, Brian Tracy, but I can do you one better. That's so important to keep showing up and growing. So please continue on your success.
Yeah. And then the second one would go along with your execute part, which is, man, get your most important thing done first. Like, I used to have a big, massive 2-hour morning routine. And I still have a little bit of one because I want my mind to be in the right framework. But I will jump right in, and I got this from Craig Ballantyne in his perfect week formula. But I will jump right in after about 15 or 20 minutes to get my day set, little light workout, water, tea, whatever, matcha, and meditation, visualization, and a little bit of reading. About 20 minutes later, I'm working on my biggest thing. That's how I wrote a book in November. The month of November, I wrote my Find Your Genius book.
Say that again. You wrote a book in the month of November?
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive, Mike.
And because I was up every morning. Now my wife was in her 12th through 16th week of pregnancy or whatever it was, and she was going to bed at like 9:30 or 10. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to bed early and getting up early. So I'd be getting up, between 4 and 6 every day and just crank for 2 or 3 hours on my book.
That's impressive.
And soon enough, I had it done, and I was letting go of perfection on it too. So the third thing I would say is praise progress over perfection. And like two things: embrace the suck.
I love that.
Yeah, you've probably heard this quote. At the beginning, you'll suck, and eventually you'll suck a little bit less, and eventually you'll suck so little that you will actually be good.
I heard a phrase, I think it was Chris Hogan, who said, masterpieces aren't written, they are rewritten.
That's good.
It's so good. You know, when I work with people that are, some are successful authors and struggling with their next book, and some are first-time authors. And I always say, write for the trash. It's not going to be good. The second you start thinking, oh, it's going to be great, it's got to be impactful. No, it doesn't need to be words on paper. We'll make it better afterward.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. And then the last one, I mean, I could add probably another 4 or 5, but the last one I'll mention today is, man, put yourself in environments. Again, back to that environmental. If I put myself in environments where my success is inevitable because I'm just surrounded, do whatever it takes to put yourself in a higher level state, higher level environments, pay what you got to, invest the time that you have to, take time off, whatever, you will shift, and it will shift by default. You won't be as much of an uphill struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you put yourself in those environments, let me add to that. When you put yourself in those environments, talk to other people, invest in them, get to know them, be interested in what they're doing in their lives and their businesses, and share yours too. Be sure you state what you're there to do. And when we're honest about that, then people kind of rally around us to help us. I mentioned in the podcast last week, I was talking about stating your intention. And I said, a gal that I know posted on Facebook, she said, someday I want to meet Russell Brunson, or my dream is to meet Russell Brunson. And imagine if instead she said, who do I know that knows Russell Brunson? She would have gotten names instead of likes.
Yeah.
And so when you show up in those environments, invest in the people, and truly not just show up and be self-serving of like, hey, what can I get of this? And screw y'all. Be very cognizant of how I want to invest in you, and people will invest in you back. But also be clear about where you're headed, because people will rally around you. The right people will want to see you get where you're going. But that doesn't happen if we keep our vision and our dream all tight, because then people are like, I don't want to say it, I don't want this. You've got to get it out there, because people will help you succeed. But that doesn't happen unless you articulate what you need.
Exactly. And that's why it's so powerful to be in masterminds, why I love masterminds. That's my single favorite. I've spent $500,000 to be in masterminds myself, and I've led a bunch. And I know you lead your own as well. And it's like, man, get yourself in those environments over and over and over again. And your peer group shifts, your identity shifts, your confidence shifts, and things become easier.
They do. And we need to see people doing the thing that we're going after, because then it doesn't seem so crazy. So if you've never written a best-selling book, first thing, meet someone who's written a best-selling book. Don't sit around and talk to other people that want to write a book, because that's not good. It's like saying you're going to start a workout plan and you're like, I'm going to pick my most unfit friend and we're going to be accountability buddies. This is a terrible strategy. Like, again, go to Sarah down the street, who runs every morning at 6 a.m. So whatever it is, whether you're growing a business, whether it's fitness goals or relationship goals, find someone who's doing that thing well, because then it doesn't seem like such a unicorn. Like once Roger Bannister hit that 4-minute mile, then everybody else did it because it seemed possible. Well, you're going to be a better runner if you know the Roger Bannisters of the world. I just have a couple more questions for you, Mike. But before we get into those last ones, where can people connect with you? Where do they find more of Mike?
Yeah, so I'm on Clubhouse as Mikezeller.
Finally got on board.
That's right. Instagram, Michael R. Zeller. And then, of course, Mikezeller.com, and LinkedIn, Facebook is Michael Zeller as well. And then, I also have secretsofclubhouse.com. So if any of you guys are getting into Clubhouse, I just have a 5-page little ebook that might be ideal for some of you guys. I think Clubhouse is an epic platform for connecting. And anyway, so those are some of the platforms right now. And eventually you'll be able to buy my books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble later this year, but not yet.
Can't wait for that. So we'll put all of Mike's links in the show notes too. So if you didn't get them live, we'll definitely put them in and on the recorded audio. 2 follow-up questions. So one is, if you could tell the world anything, what would it be, Mike?
If I could tell the world anything, Man, Socrates said the beginning of all wisdom is to know thyself. So that's ultimately, it all begins there. D. Hock, the founder of Visa, as in Visa credit cards, he, in his research, he retired in the 70s and he's still alive today. And he said in his research, and he's written for Harvard, saying this, the very best leaders in the world spend more than 50% of their time leading themselves. So for me, and for anyone that I interact with, whether friends, like I was mentoring the founders of Goalcast, the viral video company on Facebook. So I was mentoring them, back in 2018. They flew to Nashville for my wedding celebration, and they're like, Mike, at the end of the evening, they're like, Mike, everyone here knows their wealth dynamics, knows their strengths finder, knows their Myers-Briggs. You have all your friends have taken all the personality tests. Like, this is crazy. I've never been in a room like this. And somehow, like, these conversations were happening over like our wedding, celebration. And
they're like, all the cheers over here at this table, and all the D's and the D's are over here. Love it.
Yeah, and it's because, man, you can live a very intentional life that leads to greater fulfillment, greater joy, not just professionally, but personally. Like my wife and I, we would not have survived our dating months because we were so opposite. Even though we're actually very complementary, we're so opposite. She's a high ENFJ and I'm a INTP, and I'm like, she didn't understand that I wanted alone time, that I actually needed it sometimes, and to her it felt like rejection and all those things. So to know thyself is the beginning of all wisdom. So that's why I love the Zone of Genius process. That's why I'm writing a book on it. And that's why I think for all of you guys listening in, be a student of yourself, master yourself, and you can master the game of life.